All right. Hello, everyone, and thank you all for joining us during the Lytham Partners Fall 2022 Investor Conference. My name is Robert Blum, Managing Partner of Lytham Partners. During this webcast here, we welcome Acasti Pharma, ticker symbol of ACST on the NASDAQ, and their Chief Executive Officer, Jan Delvise. I've asked Jan to go through the slide presentation first, and then if there is time available at the end, we'll look to engage in a short fireside chat-like Q&A session. Before I do turn it over to Jan, I want to remind everyone that management is available for one-on-one meetings throughout the conference. If you've not already signed up for a one-on-one meeting, you can do so. Reach out to myself, Robert Blum. It's Blum, B-L-U-M, at lythampartners.com. Or you can go to our website, lythampartners.com/virtual. Click on that one-on-one meeting request button, and we will look to get you taken care of. So with that said, Jan, why don't you take over there?
Well, thanks so much, Robert. It's really great to be a part of the Lytham Fall Investor Conference. And I really look forward to telling your audience more about Acasti Pharma. Before I get started, I should mention that I'll be making some forward-looking statements today that are subject to certain risk factors. And as always, if anyone would like more information on these risk factors, I urge you to go to our website and pull down our various public disclosures there. With that out of the way, let me jump in and tell you about Acasti. We're a specialty pharma company that has a core competence, and we have key technologies, novel technologies in drug delivery and drug formulation. And what we've done is we've applied these technologies to marketed compounds, drugs that have been on the market in some cases for decades for other indications. And we're repurposing these to dramatically improve efficacy, safety, provide more convenience to the patient, and reduce side effects, all which can result in improved clinical outcomes. And we're focusing on rare and orphan diseases. And in fact, the FDA has already granted us orphan drug designation for the first 3 assets that we have in the clinic. And those 3 drugs, which I'll tell you more about in a minute, are addressing pretty significant markets. In the United States alone, the potential addressable market exceeds $3 billion. We're pursuing a 505(b)(2) regulatory pathway. Again, this is because we're really reformulating and repurposing marketed compounds. So a lot is already known about these drugs from the standpoint of safety and efficacy. So really, the going forward development pathway can be very streamlined, low cost, and very fast. We have a significant patent portfolio supporting the drug delivery core technologies as well as these drug candidates. And I should mention also that we are pretty well funded. We've got over 18 months of cash on our balance sheet, which will allow us to complete development for our lead compound, GTX-104, get it through phase 3, and to significantly advance GTX-102 and 101. Okay, with that said, let me jump in and tell you about GTX-104. So again, this is our lead candidate. We're addressing a very devastating condition known as subarachnoid hemorrhage. This is bleeding on the brain that's caused by an aneurysm that ruptures. These patients are in very serious condition. Typically, they're unconscious when they get to the hospital. 10 to 15% of these patients tend to die before they get treatment. And they're typically rushed right away in for surgery to repair that aneurysm. These patients are then kept in the intensive care unit, typically for anywhere from 3 to 4 weeks. And during that entire period, they're put on a drug called nimodipine. This is a drug that's been around since the late 80s. It's been shown to dramatically improve neurological outcomes in these patients. What you worry about is the brain not getting enough oxygen after this aneurysm occurs. So what nimodipine does is it relaxes the blood vessels, preferentially in the brain, opens those vessels up, it gets more oxygenated blood into the brain to help promote healing. The problem is that nimodipine is only available today in the United States as an oral drug. And this oral drug is very difficult to give to a patient who is oftentimes unconscious, at least during the majority of their stay in the intensive care unit. They typically have to take apart the capsule, siphon off the drug, and deliver it through a nasogastric tube. The result is that it's very difficult to control how much drug actually gets into the stomach, and then it has to pass through the liver first before it actually gets absorbed. So the result is only about 8 to 10% of nimodipine is actually absorbed. And as you'll see on this next slide on the left here, oral nimodipine also suffers from a lot of variability in terms of the resulting blood levels and therefore the impact that it has on blood pressure. So when it does finally get absorbed, you see this peaking that you see in the gray here. And then shortly after, it troughs, in between doses. So this results in a lot of inconsistency in blood pressure. So what we've done is we have figured out a novel way of solubilizing nimodipine so that it can be delivered through an IV and via continuous infusion to the patient. So 24/7 continuous infusion. And this results in a rapid onset of action, but a very consistent amount of levels in the blood, which translates into consistent management of blood pressure. This is so important because if these patients, if their blood pressure gets too low, they can become hypotensive. And this is very serious in these patients. They often have to go back in for surgery to open up the blood vessels, or you can have vasospasm, which can result in death. So very, very important that this drug is given in a more consistent fashion. And on the right here, you can just see that we're dramatically reducing the variability in blood levels with this IV infusion approach to delivering nimodipine. So bottom line here is we believe that this drug delivered IV will be potentially safer. It's going to result in better bioavailability. In fact, 100% of the drug is bioavailable, so you know exactly how much is getting into the patient. And if the patient starts to get hypotensive, you can dial back the infusion rate, reduce the amount of drug being delivered, or if they're still hypertensive, if the blood pressure is too high and you want to bring it down, you can dial it up and give more of the drug so that the patient gets into that blood pressure range that the physician wants to maintain. By going directly into the bloodstream, you don't have food effects. This is a big part of the variability of the oral drug. Any sort of food on the stomach is going to interfere with absorption. And because the oral goes through the liver, you can have a lot of drug interactions as well. So we also believe that this IV approach is going to be simpler for the nursing staff, require a lot less time to manage. These patients are all on IVs, so it's very simple to hook up an extra bag for these patients. And so our hope is that we'll see improvement in blood pressure management that can translate into hopefully reduced stay in the intensive care unit and ultimately better outcomes for these patients. Now, we've completed a PK study and reported those results back in May. It was a very successful study, and that now is leading us directly into phase 3. So we're at the point now where we're packaging all of our data for the FDA, submitting that along with the phase 3 safety study protocol, and we'll be sending that off to the FDA by the end of this month. And we hope to meet with the FDA by the end of the year to review that protocol design for phase 3 and then be able to start our phase 3 program in the first half of next year. And I mentioned this is a safety study. We do not have to prove again that nimodipine is efficacious. The FDA only wants us to show that our form of nimodipine is at least as safe as the oral. And we believe, based on all of the human studies that we've done to date, that we should be able to show more consistent blood levels, more consistent control of blood pressure, which should translate into better safety. And then just quickly, this is a drug that we can commercialize ourselves. The universe of stroke centers in the United States is about 1,400 neurointensive care units. About 400 of them are treating, at least 70 to 80% of these SAH patients. So we can reach this market directly ourselves with a small targeted sales force in the ballpark of about 30 to 40 people at peak. We are looking at and already in discussions with potential partners to market this drug in Europe and in key countries in Asia as well. Okay, let me jump to GTX-102. This is the second drug that we have in the clinic. GTX-102 is targeting a neurodegenerative disorder called ataxia telangiectasia. This is a really unfortunate disorder that tends to run in families. It comes on early in the child's life. What we see is impaired coordination. These children have a hard time standing, balancing, learning to walk. Even their speech is affected. And as they get older, we see that this impacts their immune system. It makes them more susceptible to infections and predisposes them to certain cancers, particularly blood cancers and brain cancer. So these children often don't live beyond their mid-20s. And sadly, there's no treatment for these kids today. There's no drug treatment. These kids often will get speech therapy to help with their communication. They'll get physical therapy to try to improve, their coordination, their balance. But has minimal results. These kids are often wheelchair bound for most of their lives. Now, what's interesting is corticosteroids, drugs, family of drugs has been given to these children as a treatment for their leukemia and lymphomas. And what physicians have noticed in the past is that those children that got these corticosteroids, their symptoms of ataxia tended to improve during the period of time that they were on that drug. And so more recently, a clinical study was done in Europe at a major center of excellence for ataxia telangiectasia at the University of Siena. It was conducted by Dr. Zanoli and her team. And she found that by giving an oral solution of betamethasone, this is a corticosteroid that's only available as a liquid in Europe. It's not available in the United States. She found that these kids actually significantly improved their symptoms of ataxia, and you can see that on the next slide here. There's an international scoring system called ICARS that's used to break down these symptoms into different categories. And you can see here that all of these categories improved in just 30 days on treatment with betamethasone, with the exception of ocular motor disorders. And this is an inability to focus their eyes. So based on this data, our team took betamethasone and reformulated it into an oral mucosal spray that can be very conveniently sprayed on the tongue. This spray has concentrated betamethasone so that we're delivering only 1/70th of the volume of betamethasone that was used in the Zanoli trial. And as you'll see in this next slide on the right here, in blue is the blood levels that we saw in a preclinical study where we saw more rapid onset of action by delivering the drug via our oral spray, higher Cmax or maximum concentration, and better area under the curve over a 24-hour period after a single dose than the oral spray that was used in Dr. Zanoli's study. So we're very excited about this data because this means that our formulation could be more conducive to long-term chronic use. And keep in mind that these patients would really need to be on this drug for the rest of their lives. So I'm very excited to report that we just started a PK bridging study. This study will look at dosing our oral spray and comparing it to the oral solution that's available in Europe and to the injectable form of betamethasone that's available in the United States. This study is being conducted in Canada in about 48 subjects, and we should have results before the end of the year. So with these study results, we'll be able to move directly into phase 3 next year. This will be a safety and efficacy study in patients with ataxia telangiectasia, and will probably involve about 50 or so patients. We'll probably dose these patients over a period of about 3 to 6 months. We'll need to meet with the FDA to finalize the study design, and we plan to do that early next year after we get our results for our PK study. I'll mention that there's about 12 centers of excellence that diagnose and treat these children in the United States. Johns Hopkins is the largest by far. They diagnose and treat probably 50 to 60% of the children that have ataxia telangiectasia. We've been working with Johns Hopkins for many years, and we hope that they'll be our principal investigator for our phase 3 study. You can imagine commercialization of this will be very straightforward. We need only a few people to really manage these and work with these big sites. Commercialization will be more about patient advocacy, patient education, making families aware that now finally there's the first of its kind drug approved for ataxia telangiectasia. And in the few minutes that I have left, let me tell you about GTX-101. This is a drug that we're developing to treat postherpetic neuralgia, which is the really severe nerve pain that follows a shingles infection. A large percentage of patients who get shingles end up having very severe nerve pain for weeks, months, and sometimes for years or more. What happens is the virus settles into the nerve fiber and creates a horrible pain. Patients describe this as the worst pain of their lives. These patients typically are put on oral gabapentin as a frontline treatment. This is because payers won't pay for the more expensive patch, so the patient has to go through oral gabapentin. Most patients, gabapentin does not work for them. So typically they will then be put on the lidocaine patch. The problem with the patch is that it can take up to 2 weeks to actually start working, and you can only wear it for 12 hours at a time. So these patients often experience breakthrough pain when they have to take the patch off, usually at night. So they'll wear it during the day and remove it at night. The patch can't get wet. And sometimes it falls off. It's very difficult. It has to be cut often and try to get it to fit wherever the pain occurs. So it's really inconvenient. And 40% of patients do not experience pain relief with the patch. Consequently, these patients often go on to stronger, more serious drugs like opioids. That obviously have problems with, causing abuse potential. So what we've done is we've taken an analgesic that's been around for a long time called Bupivacaine. It's commonly used in outpatient surgeries. It's very commonly used in dental surgeries. It's terrific because it has a very fast onset of action and a very prolonged, sustained, period of effect or pain relief. And you can see that in the curve on the right here. The purple line is the blood levels that we see from Bupivacaine. And what we're doing is we have reformulated Bupivacaine into a topical spray. So we're mixing it with some very proprietary excipients and a solvent that allows the spray to go on evenly in a very thin film on the skin. The solvent evaporates, and that helps to drive the drug down into the dermis, deep into the tissues. and it surrounds those inflamed nerves and calms them down and numbs them out, so that you get almost immediate pain relief within probably 10 to 15 minutes. We believe that GTX-101 will be a once-a-day application. So you put it on in the morning after you shower, and after 10 minutes, you can get it wet. So you can go swimming, you can work out. This is going to be very convenient for the patient's lifestyle. And very importantly, it's non-narcotic. So we've seen no skin irritation with this in our early human studies. Again, we think this is going to be a superior solution to what's available today. And we see that there's a big market potential here with a huge unmet need. We recently completed market research with about 250 physicians who treat pain. And they were overwhelmingly enthusiastic about this product concept. And 95% of them said they would switch their patients from the lidocaine patch to GTX-101 for all the reasons that I mentioned. What's also really interesting is while the PHN market is a small portion of the pain market that GTX-101 could address, what we know from speaking with these physicians is that even though the lidocaine patch is only approved for PHN, it's actually being prescribed for a lot of other pain indications: osteoarthritis, low back pain, diabetic neuropathy. And what's very exciting is that payers are reimbursing for these indications, even though the patch is not approved. So roughly 55 to 65% of the time, they are reimbursing without any sort of pre-authorization. So we believe this market could be very big. And next steps for us is to complete a single dose PK study. This will allow us to dial in the amount of drug per spray. And then we will follow it up early next year with a multiple ascending dose study. And that will lead us to a phase two study that we hope to start in PHN patients before the end of next year. And by the way, I should mention that all three drugs that we have in the pipeline are eligible for fast track status with the FDA. So once we do submit our NDA, we should get a very rapid review and approval. So this last slide just summarizes our key milestones coming up this year. I mentioned that we will be meeting with the FDA for GTX-104 for subarachnoid hemorrhage before the end of the year. That will allow us to finalize our phase 3 program, start our phase 3 safety study in subarachnoid patients in the first half of next year. And then we will be reporting out results for our GTX-102 PK bridging study by the end of this year. That will allow us to start our phase 3 in the second half of next year. And finally, with GTX-101, we'll be reporting out our single dose study results by the end of this year and be able to start our multiple ascending dose and phase 2 in 2023. Okay, with that, I'll turn it back to you, Robert.
Great, thank you, Jan, for that. Greatly appreciate the overview. Couple of questions here in the few minutes we have remaining. On the last earnings call, you mentioned sort of the company planning to submit the proposed design for the phase 3 safety study. But more sort of importantly, you mentioned the request of a Type C meeting with the FDA to review the phase 3 plans, obtain sort of FDA feedback and guidance before initiating the safety study. Just talk a little bit about what that means. You talked about the timing here just a minute ago, but maybe expand upon that just a little bit further.
Yeah, sure. We got very exciting results from our PK study. While it was not an objective of that study to show bioequivalence, we actually did achieve bioequivalence with the oral. So based on those really excellent results, we have put together a protocol based on previous guidance from the FDA. And we really want to get the FDA's review and comments and feedback on that protocol. So the Type C meeting is a typical way for companies to get that feedback. So it involves submitting a meeting request, which we'll be doing actually next week. And then the FDA gives you a 75-day clock. So, by day 75, they will either respond in writing to your questions or provide feedback or provide feedback on the protocol, or they will grant you a teleconference if they feel that it's necessary. Typically in our past experience, and we think it's likely in this case because it's pretty straightforward based on the guidance they previously given us, that they're likely to respond in writing, maybe tweak this or that, but we would hope that they would support us proceeding. So once we get that green light, that'll be very important. We'll announce that as soon as we get their feedback. And then we're already selecting the CRO to run this study. And they will begin the screening process, recruitment, all of that will take place early next year. So we would expect to actually be able to enroll the first patients in this study by Q2 of next year.
Great. You're actually going to be participating in a panel we have coming up here on orphan drugs. So I would encourage anyone in the audience to listen in on that. But I think one of the discussion points or maybe misnomers about some of the orphan drugs is the size of the market. Maybe just kind of reiterate the addressable market opportunity for these various programs.
Yeah, sure. So subarachnoid hemorrhage, just in the U.S., there's about 50,000 people per year who are affected by SAH. It's maybe a little more in Europe, 55, 60,000. These patients tend to be surprisingly rather young. You think of this being, in patients who maybe have very high blood pressure, but that's not always the case. And so this market is estimated, the addressable market is estimated to be about $300 million just in the United States alone. So with ataxia telangiectasia, this is truly a rare disease. There's less than 5,000 kids that have been diagnosed with this disorder in the US. And the total addressable market is estimated to be about 150 million. And this is based off pricing that we have gotten from another drug, similar drug actually, called Emflaza, which has been on the market. It's a corticosteroid, like betamethasone, and it's treating a genetic disorder called Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. So we think that's a very good model for pricing for GTX-101. And then finally GTX-102, and then finally with GTX-101, I showed you a slide earlier, this market, the PHN market, there's about 130,000 patients that suffer from a really prolonged nerve pain, where it really lasts for months and even years. And they really need, this pain relief. That market is estimated to be about $200 million, but as I showed you, it's just a fraction of the market that the patch is addressing, and we're really targeting that lidocaine patch market. So we believe the market potential for GTX-101 could exceed $2.5 billion just in the United States alone.
Great. I think we've only got about a minute left here, but on the screen here, you talk about a number of the near-term catalysts coming up here. And we talk about the cash flow runway to achieve these catalysts.
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, we've got about 38 million on our balance sheet. That's sufficient cash to get us out into 2024, at least through the first quarter of 2024. And that's enough cash to complete this phase 3 study for GTX-104. It will also at the same time significantly advance GTX-102. It's going to get us into phase 3 and probably well into that program. Again, we don't have the final sizing of this program yet. That'll be based on our discussions with the FDA, but we think it's going to be a very small study and therefore won't be very expensive. So current cash could actually fully fund GTX-102 phase 3 as well. The 101 program is a bigger program. And I think current cash will certainly take us through phase 1 and into phase 2.
Great. We're at the end of the time here, Jan. Thank you so much. Greatly appreciate it. Again, I just want to remind anyone out there, if you've not already signed up for a one-on-one meeting and would like to do so, you can reach out to me, Blum, B-L-U-M, at lythampartners.com, or again, visit the website, lythampartners.com/virtual. Click on the one-on-one meeting request button, and we will look to get you taken care of. So we hope you all enjoy the conference. Jan, thank you so much.
My pleasure, Robert. Thank you.